are so much interested in this Devonshire white paper. So the white settlers wanted to monopolize politics of Kenya. By 1920, they had more seats, majority seats on the Legislative Council, but they were not satisfied or contented. So they wanted to use this Devonshire white paper to add more on what they heard. So the whites were not satisfied with what they heard. They are not satisfied. Actually, they are not contented with though they had many seats, but still they wanted to have more seats. So this made them to demand for the declaration of the Devonshire white paper. So they believed in racial segregation or racial superiority, and they did not want to share social services with Africans and Asians. So the whites, over the white man or the white settlers, they never wanted to share anything with Africans. They never wanted to share resources with the Africans. They never wanted to share anything with the Asians. They wanted to have things that were separate from those of other people or other groups. So this made them to demand for the declaration of the Devonshire white paper. They never wanted to share their property. They never wanted to share their social things. Like once it came to, for example, hospitals, they wanted to go in the same hospitals that we Africans used to go to. When it comes to education, they never wanted to go to the same schools with the Africans. Everything they wanted to do had to be separate from that of the Africans and Asians. So the white settlers wanted to retrain, or okay, to the white settlers wanted to retrain or to retain. They wanted to retain or retrain fertile soils of Kenyan highlands. They wanted now to have full control over the Kenyan highlands that were comprised of fertile soils, leaving the Kenyans starving, crying, and yet this was their motherland. Something that was not unfair, but to them it was okay. The white settlers wanted to, so the European settlers also wanted to colonize or to introduce their or to establish their colonial government in Kenya altogether, to discourage Africans from growing cash crops, also that they could only serve as laborers on their plantations. So Africans never wanted the European colonialists or the white settlers wanted to keep using Africans as the laborers, not seeing them living independent kind of life. So the white settlers wanted to colonize Kenya as a separate colony from England. So i.e., they wanted Kenya to be declared independent from England. Another one, the white settlers were also led by Lord Dilmala, who was the Duke altogether, and the colonial and the Colonel Glad called Grigan. Colonel Grigan, who set up a number of associations to serve as platforms of raising their views altogether. So those are some of the reasons why the whites were interested. Sorry, beg your pardon. Those are some of the reasons why Europeans were so much interested in this kind of document on the Devonshire White Declaration of 1923. So let us look at the terms of the Devonshire White Paper. So from the terms we shall get the consequences or the effects of the Devonshire White Paper. To begin with, terms are like provisions. These are the terms of the Devonshire White Paper. 1. Kenyan highlands were to be exclusively reserved for the white settlers. So all the highlands of Kenya had to be belonging to the white settlers. No African, no Asian was allowed to possess control or to have control over the Kenyan highlands. Another one, the Legislative Council or Legico was to have 11 representatives of the Europeans, 5 representatives of Asia, and 1 Arab and a missionary to represent African interests. Altogether, that means that even Africans did not have a representative. That means that even Africans did not have representatives there. So Africans were instead represented by the missionaries and still the Arab, and this was 1 Arab. So in the same way, Africans were not actually totally represented. Another one, A missionary, i.e., Dr. Affe, was to be nominated to the Legislative Council to represent its interest the interest of the Africans. Africans were to be members of the Legislative Council and known to the politics and known in politics at a higher level. So Africans were known to have influence in the politics at a higher level. They had to remain below, and only positions were preserved for the white man. So there was to be no more racial segregation or discrimination in all residential areas. In all residential areas, people had to be equal. People had to live equal kind of life. Asians and African representatives of the Legislative Council were known to be on same voters register with the whites. They had to separate the Asians and African representatives on the Legislative Council. They had to make the voters registers of the whites separate from those of Africans and Asians. So the colonial office in London was to watch over the Kenyan affairs in order to maintain and protect their interests and to make sure that Africans are kept behind altogether.